Dudes, what's happening? This is Trent, and today I want to pick up an old project that I started doing, and a couple of people have been asking if I'm going to continue on the material studies and digital art workout series that I had started, a few months back. Well, I got a little distracted with doing all the Photoshop cheat box stuff, but I want to come back to this, and I want to make it a regular thing as much as I can, because this is where we're doing our crunches. This is where we're doing our sit-ups. This isn't portfolio stuff. This isn't stuff that we're eager to post online or share with everybody, but these are the essentials that are going to really boost our skill set. And that's kind of what I really want to focus this channel on, is like helping you to accomplish your concept art and illustration dreams. So these are the workouts. These are the things that are going to help you to get there. I'm going to go along with you on this ride. We're going to set aside a little bit of time every week to just do some material studies, to look at materials or other art styles that we want to study, and we're going to just jam them out. We're going to break them down and try to figure them out. So let's just jump into it. So for the sake of time, I've sped this up just a little bit, and I've gone to Google and I found a few examples of some textures that I want to emulate. I want to bring these textures into, I want to study them basically. I wanted some like muddy, mossy, kind of dirty, muddy stone, and I wanted to kind of plant some moss on top of it. And so I found some examples of exactly what it is that I want to learn to emulate. And I've literally taken that photograph and I've placed it over my sphere because I want to add a little bit of turning to it. This isn't just a method to use photos in my paintings. This is a study. This is me breaking down color variations that are happening, subtleties that are happening in the stone. And I'm color dabbing a lot, and I'm using my brush that I'm most comfortable with. Now, if you have your own style, if you like a little bit more grainy kind of a thing, then you can incorporate that. I'm emphasizing what I'm seeing there and making it a little bit more stylized. Now, one of the things you can also do, if you want to use photos but you want them to look a little bit more painterly, there's a filter called Noise Median. And I don't do too much of this, maybe just at a 2. And what that'll do is it'll make your photo a little less noisy, and it'll look a little bit more like paint, or a little bit just blotchier, I guess. It almost blurs it, but that's good because we're really just picking up colors and an overall kind of blending of color, and we're using that as a guide, and we're going in and kind of like painting in highlights and cracks. I'm paying particular attention to highlight colors. I'm paying particular attention to how cracks are formed and shaped. I'm paying particular attention to how this looks in the natural world, and I'm sort of painting it myself. This is my training wheels, and some people will say, this is cheating. But this isn't for anything. This is my study. This is the time. These are my workouts. This is not something I'm taking claim of. This is something that I'm building a vocabulary in my brain for. I am building a vocabulary of how to paint this type of rock in my brain, in my subconscious, so that I can pull this up whenever I need it during a painting session on something serious. It's sort of like when you're learning a foreign language, you learn phrases, you learn preset phrases like sumimasen, doko desu ka? That means, excuse me, where is this? In Japanese, of course. That is a statement. You learn to adopt that into your vocabulary, but it's still a preset phrase. It's a preset question that you're learning just to get pronunciation down, to learn to be able to communicate. It's training wheels. Eventually you learn to express yourself with those foreign words, but in the beginning you're just learning preset phrases. Doing these material studies, doing these photo studies are our preset visual phrases for rocks and other materials. And you might say, okay, I understand how to ask where this is. Maybe I want to say something slightly different, like bank, like where is the bank? Banku wa doko desu ka? So then you find out another word and then you add on to it. And so this isn't a Japanese lesson. I'm trying to communicate in a similar fashion. Visually, we're doing the same thing. So we understand how the moss is formed on the top because of our photo reference and because of the photo we're painting over. But if we want to extend that moss to another surface, we've already learned the preset phrase for how moss is rendered on the top surface. We just extend that to another area where we've understood the preset phrase for the visual language of the rocks. We're essentially just adding to our visual vocabulary, our language. And since painting and art and is really just a representation of life, the real world, then every one of these exercises adds to your vocabulary. And the more robust your vocabulary is, the more articulate you can be with your imagery, the more you can communicate. And eventually you'll find that you can recreate a similar rock surface in a matter of 10 or 20 brush strokes. So one of the challenges that I've decided on with this one is that I wanted it to feel rounded. And the reason for that is because I'm not just using a photograph here. I want to understand it, and that means that I want to understand how to pull forms out of it. How is lighting hitting the top surface? How is lighting going to communicate the curvature as it's rounding along the bottom? How am I going to pull in a little bit of reflective light along the bottom, and how reflective is that surface? Let's make a circle selection around the whole thing and start to round the form. I want to go in and actually round out these forms. So I'm going to grab, I don't know, like a textured brush and kind of hit that along the bottom. Textured brushes are really helpful, by the way, as well, especially with organic surfaces. And then just a normal airbrush on a new layer. And I might try maybe a multiply layer or a color burn layer, but I think color burn is going to have too much saturation. Yep, a little too much. So maybe just I'll leave it at a color burn, but I'll back it way off. And then I'm going to do another layer on top so that I can really bring out my core shadow and make it look like there's a reflective light underneath. That we've got a little bit of an atmosphere reflecting a little bit of a highlight underneath. And that'll make it look like we've kind of got a little bit, like the stone is a little bit wet even. And with a few specular highlights here and there, we're going to be able to really make this look a little bit more like there's moisture in the air. Usually when there's a lot of moisture, you're going to get a lot of bounced light. You're going to get a lot of reflective surfaces. That means more little specular highlights and things like that. But I'm really just going in and extrapolating on the rock materials from that photograph and smudging out some areas. Now, this middle part right here is closer to the eye, and I want that to feel more rounded, so I'm bringing out a little bit more specular light on that particular surface, making sure that the bottom part, that core shadow, really makes it turn the form a little bit. And by doing this, I'm not just taking that flat texture and pasting it in. I'm building a greater understanding of how I can curve stones in some of my own paintings. And I'm also playing around a little bit with stylization too, to kind of find my own language just a little bit. This is also kind of a good time for you to play around, like try different things, try to add. You'll notice that I'm adding little divots, and then I'm taking the highlight color, that specular highlight color, I just color dab it and then I put it along the bottom because our light is coming from just above the camera's head, and we have kind of like a secondary light along the very top of the moss, and so that's going to create a little bit of a specular light on the bottom of a shadow, and we see that all throughout the stone material photo reference. So that's what we're extrapolating on. That's what we're identifying and expanding on. And we're adding that into our vocabulary so that when we're doing a little highlight, we know where the shadow needs to be underneath that or above that. We know that because we have that guide map. We have the photograph underneath it all that's showing us, or that's our training wheels. I wanted to kind of play around a little bit with bringing out little edges and grooves and really amplifying some of the highlights to almost make it look pointier, like it's got a lot of depth to it. That's a big crack down the middle. I got a nice big rock crack right down the middle of my spherical rock. And of course, maybe you want to do things a little bit differently. Maybe you don't want as thick of cracks going through the rocks that you're doing. In hindsight, I also realize there probably would have been a little bit of that gray light coming from underneath going into that big crack through the middle as well. And, you'll always find, your whole life, you'll always find something in pieces that you're doing that you'll look back on and go, oh man, I really could have done a better thing there, or oh, I missed that little highlight, or and really that's just a sign that you're paying attention, and that's good. What we're trying to learn is how to pay attention. We're trying to learn how to cluster our details and how to pay attention to lighting and how to make sure that the viewer's eye is going where we want the viewer's eye to go. That's the whole point of all these things. So if you always feel like you suck, you're in a great place. It means that you're always looking at what you did yesterday and thinking, oh, I can do better than that now. I can do better than what I could do yesterday. I can do better today. Celebrate that feeling of failure, I guess. The failures that we face just make us stronger. I wanted to point out the mixer brush tool. You get this by holding down on the icon for the brush over here in your toolbar, and then it pulls up a little pop-up. You go all the way to the bottom. That's your mixer brush tool. And this thing is going to blow your mind, especially if you like to use photos, but you want them to look more painterly. So pick out like a nice textury brush. Pick out a brush that has a lot of oily fibers or something like that. And make sure that you're on the layer that your image is flattened down onto. This won't work if you're on like an empty layer above everything. And then just start to go through and kind of swipe through, and you'll notice it does like a smearing, a smudging, and it kind of holds some of the color in it. And you can actually color dab to kind of smear in some more color. I know some artists that do this almost exclusively. They just splotch down color, and then they work with mixer brushes to smear around all of their colors. And this kind of gets rid of a lot of that photo noise. And I kind of like it because it just blends colors really nicely. This was something that Photoshop didn't have for a long, long time. And you'll notice that we're veering away a lot from what our photo was, but we're keeping the essence of all the colors that were mixed together. We're keeping that kind of muddy brown in there. And we're pulling out little highlights, and sometimes that mixer brush is just a little too strong, so you got to kind of like smear it around a little bit more, and that takes a little bit of getting used to too. But ultimately, if you want a more painterly look, but you like to get some of the results of mixing in photos and some of those secondary and tertiary colors that you get from mixing in photos, the mixer brush tool is going to be really nice for you. And like I said, I mean, sometimes I'll use that almost exclusively for a painting. And this brings up a really nice point about doing these texture and material studies, is that it gives us a chance to try new tools. And I want to keep kind of dropping in little tools and things that I use that you can try out for yourself. And if it doesn't work for you, though, don't force it. You don't have to do it this way. You might even find that you do a little bit more of a line art style, and doing these studies just helps you along to extend your vocabulary in the art style that you like to work in. Maybe you like to do something more cartoony. Well, you can do a little bit more of a cartoony version of the material study that you've got from your photo reference that you've picked out. You can still apply like, hey, how can I render moss in an interesting way? There's I can think of 50 different ways to render moss just using ink and brush. I could do a material study just on this one surface type, or this mossy rock. I could do 50 different stylistic explorations just from the same reference material, and try all kinds of different brushes in my own brush library that I use using the mixer brush, and just seeing how does this react and how does that react. And this is when, if you set aside that little bit of time to just practice and do studies, this is a good time to kind of try that trick that you've never tried before, or that you've heard about online, or that you saw on my channel or another artist's channel. This is a good opportunity to try that little chisel brush thing that you've been seeing that artist that you like working with. Let's see, does that help me to get cooler looking mossy rocks faster, for instance. So I'm going to speed it up just a little bit more here. I'm going to carve out little areas around the outside, because it's very clear that there are some thick divots going into this surface, and I want that to be reflected in the actual silhouette of the whole thing. And I want to turn the form just a little bit more, so I'm using some colored dodge to really boost some of the highlights. And you can see that in the reference, it kind of has this blown out saturation along the top edge, although I do feel that I lost a little bit of the curvature here with that secondary light. But it's a study, and I'm aware of it, so in the future I can be a little bit more consistent with my light. I did feel that some of the divots and lips that I have on there were a little bit too strong, so I did smooth those out towards the end. I added a little bit of a rim light around the outside to turn the form just a little bit more, as if there's a little bit of a light behind it. And I did go in and filled in just some little hairs or little moss fibers to give a little bit more texture to that moss surface. And that's really applying some other things that I knew to do, not necessarily from this reference, but just things that I wanted to fill in. And of course, smooth out that little edge that I had that had been bugging me through most of this study. And this is where I'm playing around. I'm not looking at the reference as much as I'm just playing around in this little vocabulary set that I've created. I'm understanding rocks more. I'm understanding how the moss can set on those rocks more. And I'm just extrapolating and having fun with it. And after about 40 minutes, I'd say this was a really good study. You should probably try to tune these to be about a 30-minute study for yourself. Pick out a kind of material that you'd like to learn from. It could be material that another artist painted. It could be a material from a screenshot from a video game. I'm going to be going along with you on this ride to expand my own vocabulary, my own visual vocabulary, through these digital art workouts. And I hope you come along for the ride. I want to try to do at least one a week, but I might end up doing more just because they're really fun to do. And I feel like you can get a lot out of this. This can really boost your skills with illustration. The most important thing that you can do is make it your own and have fun with it. Don't try to compare it to other people. Just do it your own way. Just adopt a little bit more every week, and after a year, you'll be amazed at your progress. It's almost guaranteed. If you are a digital artist and you are interested in learning some of my uber secret tricks and tips and cheats, specifically one of the things that a lot of people had been telling me is that they feel like their art, it's just too slow to get progress on their artwork. So I just recently finished a Photoshop cheat box. It's called the Legendary Photoshop Cheat Box. And it's because it's just that. It's basically the most down and dirty tricks that you can use to literally double your speed with painting. These are all the things that I wish I knew back when I was working on Warcraft and Diablo and League. So pick up this set of real-time videos over on my Gumroad channel and double your speed. All right, dudes, that's it for me on this one. I'll catch y'all money on the bone and a ciao, baby. Yeah.